Here.
Deputy Mayor Rose Clark. Here. Council members Jack Rock Jr.
Here.
Bob Edgar.
Here.
Lucy Kukoviac. Here. Gerald F. Robinson.
Here. Can we move agenda confirmation?
I would move agenda confirmation.
Please register our votes. Okay, the agenda is confirmed unanimously. Next up, we have public comment. A handful of individuals tonight. First up is Good Space Guy, followed by Chestine Edgar. Go ahead, sir.
Guten Abend. Es freut mich wieder hier zu sein. Ich heiße Good Space Guy. The Washington State minimum wage is $9.06 an hour. And in Burien, there are always several businesses on the verge of going out of business. Over time, in a year, various businesses in Burien have gone out of business, and this is normal. So some business owners find themselves right at the break-even point, and they're struggling whether they should stay in business or go out of business. So $9.06 an hour, and there's a lot of unemployment in Burien. In January, it will go up to $9, and January 1st, the minimum wage will go up to $9.19 an hour. And I've noticed every January, some of the businesses that I patronize go out of business. So we should anticipate that next month, we're going to see some Burien businesses go out of business. And the unemployment rate in Burien is a cause for concern. Labor is a precious resource, and when you don't hire labor, it's a huge waste. And here in Burien, we also have the business and occupation tax. I think there's somewhere around 40 cities in the state of Washington that have a business and occupation tax, and the rest of the cities don't levy this tax. So Burien has a reputation for being a high tax area. So one wonders, why would anyone move to Burien? Why would a business move to Burien? Or how can Burien businesses grow? When you tax something, you decrease it. And so the minimum wage going up to $9.19 an hour, and Burien having a business and occupation tax. The tax is a small tax, but still it's a lot of mental struggle for business people. It's an inconvenience. I think you could get more employment in Burien by screaming your heads off against the minimum wage. And no, don't scream your heads off, that's not healthy. You should oppose the minimum wage, and you should abolish the business and occupation tax. So I see that the business and occupation tax is on the consent agenda. I would recommend that you remove it from the consent agenda and repeal it if employment of people in Burien is important to you. I think the living standard comes from employment. When people work, they produce the goods and services that make up our living standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Edgar?
My name is Chestine Edgar. I live at 1811 South 152nd Street. To the council members, at the last working session, that would be November 26th meeting, no citizen comments were allowed except for that of one citizen, which was read from the dais by a council member. And I believe if we are not going to have citizen comments, then we have no citizen comments. but I do not believe that some citizens have privilege to have their comments read, and then other citizens aren't allowed comment time. In addition, the meeting was disappointing to me in that the work sessions were established for interaction for the citizens to work with the council members, and there was no time for citizen interaction during that work session. Then when the packet came out for this council meeting, December 3rd, it now appears that the client that Mr. Robison read the letter for also is a client of Mr. Robison's law offices. And it's my understanding that when a council member is presenting something as an attorney, then it's his obligation to go down and join the audience and present that from the audience, rather than commingling the council position with what is a private practice issue. By good legal ethics, you shouldn't commingle both jobs. On the topic of the work session, these are things that I would like to see put into the council working procedures. One, that staff members not have any correspondence, should not be censoring correspondence, emails, phone messages that come into the council. This interferes with transparent government and the free inter-exchange between the citizenry and the council members. Number two, council members should not be allowed to poll their friends at the dais before a vote is taken. So that in order to create a coalition with their friend who comes alphabetically after them, they then can vote with their friend on the issue. These are supposed to be independent votes, and we saw that happen a couple of meetings ago. I'm submitting this so that you can read the details of it, okay? It seems to me that in an honest and transparent government, each member casts their votes based on the information they have, not on what their friends are going to do at the dais at that moment in time after they polled them. Three, there's an 8-step criteria for the evaluation of the city manager that should remain within the council manual and should be consistent with the human resources evaluative description of the process. 4, there should be clearly defined criteria about ad hoc committees that are established. We're told there's only one existing ad hoc meeting, last meeting, when in fact there are 3 existing ad hoc committees. There's a library committee, there's an economic development committee, and there's a shoreline master plan committee. The members of that are unclear. We never get a clear picture of that. What their charge is never clear, how the information is going to be used, and we never know what their recommendations are. And each time that we ask for a report, we're given sort of sketchy information, but we never really know what's going on. Those ad hoc committees should have procedures established, and we should have a way to hear back from what's really happening with them.
Ms. Edgar, I'm afraid your 3 minutes is up. Can I ask you to let the other people testify, and then if you have more testimony, you can come back?
Okay, be glad to. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up, I can't quite make out the name. It looks like the last name is Arnold.
Hi, my name is Rand Arnold, 13611 2nd Avenue Southwest, Burien. The Burien City News, and they has this supposedly from the City Council, says, by now everyone is aware that the attempt to annex the North Highline area failed proposal November 6th. The margin of the annexation election sent us a clear message. The majority of voters in the white tender and invested unincorporated North Highline do not want to become part of the city of Burien. We've been debating the annexation issue for years. Consume the time and resources of the city staff and council. It's time to move on. I'm kind of curious as to who actually wrote that, since somehow the council really don't want the issue to move on yet. And I also remember it had a bit of a fit when somebody tried to. So it's kind of interesting. It's time to move on. I don't see why you don't move on unless somebody is hoping to be able to try to annex the area again in the future. And since it was not even a close vote, it seems kind of silly to think about. That's fine. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Rachel Levine.
Excuse me, my name is Rachel Levine, and I live at 430 South 124th Street, Burien. I left at the door, or over on the table, a little flyer to advertise the White Center Library Guild Holiday Bazaar, which is next Saturday, December 8th, from 11 to 3 at the White Center Library. This has been going on for a number of years. This is one way we raise money to help pay for the extra programs for the kids. So I hope you'll all pass that information on. And we have a great magician who comes at 2 o'clock that all the kids like. Now, I'm no longer the president of the Library Guild, but I continue to help support the library. As the majority of the City of Burien Council have been supporting the White Center Library from the time that I know. There has been some charge made that somehow Burien was trying to steal the White Center Library from that area. I just want to remind all of you that you represent me as well. I am a member of this city. I voted to become part of this city, and you are representing my interests and all of those that became part of Burien, just as well as those that were here 20 years ago to start the city of Burien. So I say that because if what I, as a citizen and a resident, expect is that our council and our elected representatives will take care of the assets that are part of the city of Burien. The White Center Library, as well as the Boulevard Park Library, is now within the borders, the boundaries of the city of Burien. It is an asset that belongs in our purview. It was not built, and we did not support this library to become part of an imagined annex to Seattle. This library was not built with our funds to either consolidate the library, which was the first effort that you all went to bat for us. I remember Councilmember Rose Clark coming to Issaquah and talking about how unfair it would be to take over city property, which was going to be a park, to build a library that they wanted to build. I think it was where the old Puget Sound junior high is. At any rate, I know I'm at the end of my time here. I left a message for you, but my recommendation is to continue to be stewards of our assets of the city, and that there be a process by which there can be input from the community so everybody is on the same page, that we don't get, again, a lot of mixed messages with the truth about what is happening with the library. And I would like to see that be part of the process by which this library, new library, would be cited. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the last person we have signed up this evening is Quentin Thompson.
And good evening, audience. I was gone for a month because I had some important things to do, and I had asked Councilmember Robinson to read a letter to you guys last week because I was unable to attend the council meeting like I normally do. And the more I thought about it, I talked to Mayor Bennett over the weekend, and I've talked with Mayor Rose Clark. And because I have a slight vision problem, I have asked Mayor Bennett to read my letter for this evening. And I hope this will help you guys put some things into perspective so this never happens again, because I am very angry about what's going on in the city of Burien, and it makes me feel that I cannot take any time off when I needed to take some time off, not only for my personal business, but for my family members in the city of Burien. Thank you very much.
I understand your feeling, Mr. Thompson, about not being able to take time off. So here is the letter that Mr. Thompson asked me to read. Dear council members, it's not appropriate for Jack Block Jr. to make allegations against the city of Burien council. The city manager, Mike Marcus, are the citizens of the city of Burien and council during city business. If he makes any changes, he needs to add it to the agenda like everything else that needs to be voted on through the Burien city council members as well as the citizens in the community of the city of Burien. I firmly believe as a citizen in the community, Jack Block Jr. is only out for himself. He does not seem to think of the council members' feelings, or he does not take into consideration how the citizens of Burien feel. Citizens should have a chance to vote on a new mayor for the Burien City Council when it comes up for re-election. I firmly believe, and I could be wrong, that he is asking for people to back him up so he can be elected as an elected mayor. This is not going to work because I, Quentin J. Thompson, will not vote for him as an elected mayor, because if I do, or if anyone else votes for him in the city of Burien, we would lose thousands of dollars that the city of Burien does not have. Councilmember Block does not have the right to make such an important decision when two of the council members are not there. All council members should be present for an important decision such as this. As far as I am also concerned, Councilmember Block was for the children in the schools. However, if you take a look at this letter, you will know that this is a bluff because he wants to cut the resource officer from Highline High School, and then the students and the staff will not have anyone to go to if there's a problem in the campus. They will only have their parents to go to because there will not be anyone else. What happened to the nice person Councilmember Block was? You cannot have a conversation with him and two other council members as they are so negative towards the council, the citizens, and the city manager, who has done an outstanding job for the city of Burien. If you really look at how things are run, Mike Martin has budgeted the city's money well, and the programs run smoothly. If we did not have Mr. Martin run the programs, we would have a city like Normandy Park that would not have the services that we need. We would end up going back to unincorporated King County because we would not have any money in the budget. Councilmember Block wants to cut the school resource officer and yet hire two new officers, which the city of Burien does not have funds. For the annexation of North Highline to Burien, Councilmember Block tried to take the initiative off the ballot so the citizens of North Highline could not vote on the plan. Council members need to let everyone vote on it before decisions are made and give everyone a fair chance to vote when it comes up for re-election. Thank you for allowing me to express my perspective. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me by email at qjtkYCW@hotmail.com. Sincerely, Quentin J. Thompson. Okay, that brings us to the end of our individuals who have signed up for public comment this evening. If anyone else would like to comment, please assemble at the microphone, or if anyone wants to finish their comments that they were timed out on, please go ahead and assemble at the microphone.
Okay, my comments are continuation of items that I would see, that I would like to see put into the council packet. How items get on the agenda for the council meeting needs to be clarified. There is a non-rule that 3 members must vote to get it on the agenda. It's not a rule, it does not appear in the packet. That needs to be qualified because it's a rule that doesn't exist, okay? Item number 6, how unfinished items on the agenda are handled needs to be clarified. Right now, when they're unfinished and citizens are waiting for an answer, council members, they sort of just disappear into a black hole. They do not reappear. We don't hear the outcomes of those. We need to know what's going to happen to those unfinished items. Are we going to then pass them to the next meeting, or are we going to get some written explanation for them? But the meeting ends and there's no clarification of what happens to those. How requested information that's requested by council members and citizens at the council meeting is going to be handled. Frequently, questions appear and then they reappear about information, and nobody can ever seem to get a solid answer on it. We don't get it from the city staff. I believe, and I'm not exaggerating, that at least 6 times the topic of how long the vehicle tax is going to last has come up. We've never gotten a definitive answer on that, and I've listed out some others for you that reappear over and over and over and are asked for, and yet we're never given the information. Citizens stand up here at this dais, at this podium, and ask the dais for information, and the information is promised by the staff, and yet it doesn't come to the next meeting, and it doesn't come to the next meeting, and it doesn't come to the next meeting. Never comes. I would suggest that we place citizen comments on the agenda when the items actually come up. This would eliminate the complaint that Ms. McGilton has had that people at the beginning of the meeting make comments and run out the door. If you allow them to make comments when the agenda item comes up that they wish to speak about, then it makes more sense to the council that are hearing the comments in relation to that item coming up, and it certainly holds the audience longer, which Ms. McGilton has suggested that she would like to have people more engaged in meetings. And lastly, when the city staff brings something up, an item that the council is going to vote on, that citizen comment is requested on, or if there is a hearing, and I've asked this years ago, and I'm asking it again, that the box at the top needs to be completely filled in by the city staff before it comes forward. And that includes a summary of what it's about, the costs, including the staff time. The actual costs, including the staff time, need to be included. They have not been included. If they have to be included for citizens to bring things forth for the comprehensive plan, then they should be brought. Then those things should be included for any other things also. That the funding sources be identified, and if that funding source is not, should fail, then alternative funding sources that are considered should be. And that lastly, whether the city can afford it or not needs to be included in it. And I would like to make one last comment, and this is to Ms. Levine's comment. While the libraries may be an asset to the city, okay, they do not belong to the city. They belong to the King County Library System, and that remains the domain of the King County Library System to make decisions about those things. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Becker. And so anyone else would like to testify, please just come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, I'm Barbara Blackman, speaking tonight as president of the North Carolina Appropriated Area Council. I attended the King County Library Board meeting last Tuesday in Issaquah, where a lot of discussion ensued regarding the fate of the White Center Library. We're very pleased that the Library Board is no longer considering consolidating the White Center and Boulevard Park libraries, and that they're going forward with the promise made to the community with the 2004 levy, that is, to keep the White Center Library in White Center. Unfortunately now, there are people who are trying to edit and rewrite the history involving the library issue. These particular individuals are not people who have any concern about the Library Board's plans to consolidate and move the library. These are not the people who travel to North Bend and Issaquah and be heard by the Library Board to let them know how much and what the libraries mean to the community. These particular individuals are not the people who stood outside the library talking to people, educating them about what the Library Board's plans were, gathering signatures in attempts to save the facility. No, these are people who are now editing the history of the library. They were more concerned about the potential loss of the marijuana farmers market in White Center, but expressed no concern about the loss of the library. These are people that are on record as saying our community is overserved by libraries. They obviously know nothing about the history, about how the Boulevard Park and White Center Library would have long been closed by now, if not for the tireless efforts of the former Library Board President, Rachel Levine, the members of NUA, as well as the efforts of some of the Burien City Council members, namely Brian Bennett, Jerry Robeson, Rose Clark, Joan Gilpin, and Jack Block. Certain people are now using the siting of the White Center Library as a way to try to discredit those who have worked hard for a number of years to save the libraries while they stop back to do nothing. The concern over the years about the libraries had nothing to do with personal gain. It had to do with what was best for the community. I just think it's important that the facts and the truth are heard, and not what appears to be a continued attempt by those individuals who do not support annexation to mislead the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lawrence?
Part of Dr. said a lot of things that I'm happy that she said. So I'm going to add directly speak to Ms. Edgar as she's used me or spoke directly to me. The King County Library system is something that we all support with our taxes. It is a dedicated stream of money that cannot be used for anything but libraries. And it is administered through an unelected board chosen by the King County executive, with the council members, I'm sure, have to form that opinion. So the system works for the entire King County. And it's only because we have voices to speak up for the needs of our own communities. Supposedly, we get information to that board from our communities, what we need in our communities. It is, in my view, the role of the system to serve the community libraries, not the other way around. This is not a business model for us as a community. So this is why I have asked that as a part of this site process, which the King County Library has a whole site process by which they're going to make their decision about where this new library is that we all voted for in 2004, where that will go. And among those site ideas is that they have an opportunity for community preference and for lease versus purchase and for partnerships. So there needs to be a process by which those items, those considerations can be brought to the community. And that means here, because this is our community, that is where our libraries are. And in North Highline, I know that there was all kinds of comments made about, well, we already do have a beautiful library, where you are. But I go to the White Center Library. That's my community library. And it will be continued that I use all the libraries in town, but that's close. So that's going to be my library along with the Boulevard Park Library. And just to remember that these libraries historically have represented what the community comes together and does for each other. In other words, they are democracy on the ground, not in some faraway place down like the King County office downtown. They're here in our communities. They represent what we do as people for each other. They're not to serve a system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. White. That brings us to the end of our public testimony.
Mayor Bennett?
Yes.
Yes, at the last meeting, Deputy Mayor Gordon was able to read a statement in the record of the city courtesy.
Okay, so you're going to need to get in line, but okay. So two quick things. First, I forgot to mention during the roll call that Jody Gilman is excused this evening. And second of all, Councilman Robinson, if you would.
Yeah, I wanted to address directly Mrs. Edgar's statement about being a client of mine. He's not a client of mine, never has been a client of mine. He's a constituent. He has difficulty writing things down. He called me about the same things that were in the letter. And the person that normally would assist him by writing things down wasn't available, so my secretary took his dictation over the phone in order to put it down in writing for him at his request. He did not pay me. I did not give him any advice on that. I did not discuss it with him, what he was going to say before he said it. He was not a client, never has been a client, and I am getting sick and tired of these personal attacks coming from uninformed people that seem to hate the city of Burien and everything about it. Thank you.
Councilor Block.
Yes, this is my response to Deputy Mayor Clark's statement. At the November 26th meeting, Deputy Mayor Clark read into the record a statement regarding her actions in terminating the November 19th City Council meeting. This is my response to her statement. Recent actions by the majority of the Burien City Council and the city manager for the issue of annexation have resulted in a divided and polarized community. At the November 19th meeting, I made several motions off the floor with the intent of ending the problem and putting the community on a positive path towards reconciliation. The third motion I was going to make, to add 2 new officers, was intended to demonstrate to the community that the focus of the council had returned to the municipality. Given that the November 19th meeting was the first following vote and rejection by near 2-to-1 margin of Burien's annexation, I felt it was an appropriate time to address the issue and begin bringing the community back together. Bringing a motion off the floor is a regular action on the part of an elected body. In fact, the motion off the floor was taken to the Burien's designation of North Highland as potential annexation area. Bringing up the issue at the first meeting following the election was appropriate and timely. While consideration can and should be made for council members' personal schedules, it is unrealistic to expect the business of the city to halt because of the council member's absence. The only underhanded and improper action that took place at the November 19th meeting was when Deputy Mayor Clark and Councilmember Robinson walked out of the meeting, ending the quorum and preventing the business before the body from being done. In her statement, Deputy Mayor Clark has made several references that are questioning my actions. While the intent to withdraw the ballot issue, and this was moved per consultation with King County Elections Department, PAA withdrawal, following the form of Councilmember Robinson's motion off the floor, and change of government. This is to put the issue before the voters, and if they affirm, then move forward with citizen input rather than waste staff time on something that may or may not happen. On important issues, I wish to address the last allegation, that of not bringing forward the issue of adding 2 new police officers during the budget debate, as it is the most damning. Deputy Mayor Clark alleges that I did not bring up the issue of adding 2 new officers during the budget debate. I would like to point to the matrix on page 98 of the October 15th agenda for this item, which I asked to be placed on there, is clearly included. I would also point to the video at 1 hour and 53 minutes into the meeting, where when asked the question of adding 2 new officers, Deputy Mayor Clark clearly states, "I will be a rule vote on this issue." As I stated earlier, it was my intent to demonstrate to the citizens of Burien that the focus of the city had returned to Burien. Our city has been awarded a federal COPS grant that will pay a significant portion, providing 2 new officers to our city. During this financially challenging period, it would be short-sighted and unfortunate if we did not take advantage of this grant to help fund 2 new officers. Recently, there was a home invasion in North Burien where a resident was pistol whipped and his wife raped while their 18-month-old baby lay in the next room. Burien needs more cops. Unfortunately, police protection isn't free. My proposal to move the solid waste franchise fee back to the general fund and compensate for this by increasing the TBD as Transportation Benefit District for Burien by $10 would have allowed Burien to hire 2 new officers to address the public safety needs of our city. Deputy Mayor Clark, we're here, both in your accusations and in your vote on this issue. Thank you. Please pass this to Ms. Weatherby.
Okay, so we've gotten that out of our systems. In the future, I would ask that if we have council reports, that we state those during council reports portion of the agenda. For now, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is correspondence for the record. We have a number of emails and letters that are available to view in the packet. Next item is the consent agenda. Can we move approval
I would move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Can we please go to a vote? Consent agenda is approved unanimously. Next up, the business agenda. The first item on the business agenda is the capital projects cost report.
Good evening. At your September 17th meeting, Councilmember Locke asked staff to provide a report about how we control costs on capital projects, and specifically we talk about transportation projects. So I have a couple topics I can speak to as far as cost control, and then review a little bit about project estimating, change orders, how we control costs by managing risks, and then some other procedural cost controls we have in place. So to start with, this slide describes a little bit about how the reliability of our cost estimates improve as projects mature. So when we first conceive of a project, we haven't done any research at all, and we might say, well, let's do another phase of first, it's going to be another mile, oh, it'll be a few more $1 million. At that point, our typical estimate range can vary anywhere from 50%, the final cost could be 50% below to 200% over. It's just, we haven't really scoped the project, we don't have the details. But then, as the project matures and we define it better, we define the limits, we start actually walking the project, if we need walls or bridges, what kind of stormwater issues we might have. And it is each step of the way as we go with the project, we start refining the estimate. And this particular table, of course, it's very estimating, but it's a table I pulled out of one of our WashDOT project estimating manuals. And by the time you get to you produce your plans and specifications and estimates, and you're getting ready to put the project out on and advertise it for bids for construction, now you generally like to hope that your estimate's about within 15% of where the project will be when it's complete. But again, it's still a project estimate. So after bid opening, throughout the whole project, we always work on refining our estimates so we can be more accurate, react to changes, be proactive about things that we see as we're moving. So at the time of bid opening, there are some things we learned from just the bid opening itself. We haven't even awarded the contract yet, but we have some knowledge we gained from bid opening. And for example, the range of bids, if we have a huge range of bids, sometimes that tells us that maybe the contractors didn't understand our package. And so we need to look and see what might have gone wrong in our specifications, things like that. And we react by either doing a little research to see what maybe they didn't understand, or we can modify our project teams. We have people out helping us manage the project as we move forward. There's a lot of things we know when we bid the project. The number of bids, if we have a lot of bids, means there was a lot of competition, so it's driving profits down. And when the contractors come out, they tend to be working really hard to achieve those profits. And sometimes you'll get a contractor that's nickel and diming you for every little thing. And so when it's that tight, it's good, and it's good that bids are tight, but then you need to be sure that you're modifying kind of how your approach is with project management by teaming up enough, putting enough resources there to be sure you're keeping track of your contractor. If one contractor, the low bidder, was unusually low, it could be that bidder just didn't understand the project, and that's an important thing to know at that point. So there's lots of things. If one bid item, also if that was off, one bid item was bid all over the place in different bids, maybe that one bid item, the understanding of a retaining wall or something was fine. So you learn things at that point, and you can kind of modify how you're working forward to help address those things. So typically then at bid, we again hope to be at kind of the 15% range to estimate the final amount on the project. Another important thing to note is most of our public works contracts are unit price contracts. And this is consistent with industry practice, and what our contractors expect to see from us. It's often required by our funding agencies. And what it means is all of the quantities and items on the project are field measured. And the way you measure them and how those measurements are defined are carefully defined in our specifications. So if it's curved and it's by the linear foot, it'll tell you exactly how you measure that. If it's by the cubic yard, it'll tell you how you're going to calculate that and whether you have to survey it. And so it's very specific, and especially in the case of federally funded contracts. And then finally, the other thing to keep in mind about unit price contracts is that what that means is the bid amount is not what you pay in the end. What you pay in the end is the actual quantities that you put out there. So it could be a little bit higher, it could be a little bit lower. Okay, so coming to change orders. So change orders are required for any work that we do on a construction contract that isn't covered by the contract itself. So it doesn't mean that we've done something wrong, and it doesn't mean, what it does mean is we need to plan for them. And a change order is the result of sort of a necessary balance of how much money do we spend in design versus how much money we're going to spend in construction. And so we're always looking to see, a good example is undergrounding. So you can do the perfect design if you want to put tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into potholing. And you could pothole instead of every quarter mile or every 200 feet, you could pothole every foot, and then you would know precisely what's out there. You wouldn't be surprised by anything when you're digging in a trench. But instead we don't do that. We kind of balance how much money we're going to spend on the design part of the contract and what our risk is in construction. So it's kind of that delicate place of when do we get enough information versus. Oh, and potholing means digging in the ground to see what's there ahead of time. So we take a spot and we dig a small pothole and see what's in there.
So, for example, on First Avenue, that was a case where we knew that there was a lot of stuff under the ground. We didn't know what was there. There were no as-built that were accurate. And so that was a case where we could have done more pothole in the use of this.
And again, it's a balance. I think we did a nice number of potholes on the current phase 2. We're still finding some things, but I think the amount of money we expended in researching it was a good proportion to how much risk we're taking on as we proceed with construction. So with regard to change orders, there are a few kind of basic categories of change orders. There's ones that the city initiates, ones that the contractor initiates, and then something called a cost reduction incentive proposal, which isn't commonly used by cities, but it is used. The city-initiated change orders, examples are unexpected conditions. And so we specify we need a new electrical conduit in for a signal, and our electrical contractor's out there digging and putting in that conduit, and he hits unexpected groundwater, and his trench fills up with water, and suddenly now we need a drainage system to drain the water out of that trench and possibly some different kind of fill for the road to support the road and the structure of the road itself. And this is outside of the scope of the electrical contract that we might have put together. And so that could result in a cost change order for the city. Again, it's nothing, it's not a bad thing, it's just a necessary part of construction. Again, with respect to design, we try to predict those things when we can. We spend the money in design to kind of know where water might happen, but we have to find that little, how much investigation we do ahead of time versus what we find out along the way. Plan ambiguities, not very common, but probably the most frequent case I see in this is when we have lots of funding sources who all want their specifications included in a project, and we end up with a specification package that's anywhere from 400 to even 1,000 pages I've seen. That tends to result in that there's a possible risk of having specifications that conflict with one another. We try to avoid that, we try to recognize it before it happens, but sometimes it happens. Extra unanticipated work. The one that comes to my mind that for some reason I've had happen a few times, we've had to relocate a private property sign or a fence as part of the contract. We put in the contract as a relocation, but when the contractor picks up that sign, we find out it was rotted or the foundation was bad and it just completely dissolves in their hands, and suddenly I need to do a change order to produce a new sign and relocate it. No one's fault, but it was something that we didn't recognize it was going to be there until we touched it, and then we had to fix it. So same I've seen happen with fences. Sometimes we think a fence is in really good condition and it turns out it's not, and we have to replace it. So those are the types of changes that the city would initiate, and are typically cost change orders. Design criteria changes we generally don't do. We try to stick with the criteria we have at time of bid, but sometimes something will crop up like an environmental requirement or maybe a new structural design thing that we actually want to incorporate that we could do by change order just because it's in the public interest. Contractor initiated changes, probably the most common is a repair procedure. They'll install a $50,000 vault. They'll crack the edge of it as they install it. We have the option, and it's our choice, always our choice, but we can say, oh, that's rejected, or we can say, what's your repair procedure? When they repair it, we have options of doing a no-cost change order to accept it, or we could even do a credit change order if we think somehow the life has decreased from a 50-year vault, say, to a 48-year vault or something like that. So there's lots of things we can look at when they make a proposal like that, but we don't have to accept them. Material substitution is probably the most common material substitution I can think of is for landscaping. It seems like by the time you get to landscaping, often the type of plant that was specified maybe isn't available this season, or for some reason it didn't grow. So I've often had those, and those are typically no cost, or we can kind of change orders depending on what they propose. Occasionally we get a work method change, but typically we try not to specify a work method, but sometimes we'll specify a certain type of finish on a concrete to be achieved a certain way, and the contractor might come up with some better idea of how to do it. So. The cost reduction incentive proposal, the last one, sometimes, and this is again a totally voluntary thing, but sometimes contracts include a procedure for this where the contractor can come up with a way of achieving savings. It might cost us some money up front, but we agree to share in the savings, and so it's going to drop the overall cost of the contract, or we're going to split the savings between us and the contractor. So some of the cost controls associated with change orders. First of all, the oversight of the state auditor's office, and knowing that we're going to get audited each year, this is a big one. They require that our change order must not be so materially different from the main purpose of the contract that it constitutes a new undertaking that should have been subject to competitive bidding. So this is what keeps us from, say, tacking on a new public works maintenance facility to the First Avenue South project or something like that. So we can't just add something to the contract that's completely different and outside the scope because we should have bid that work. The other things we do, and I've done on all of my projects, we do written justifications. So the written justification goes in the file and it explains why the change order was necessary, how it's addressing something that's either missing in the contract or wasn't addressed by the contract, how we're addressing the cost, and whether, or if it's a credit, how we're addressing the credit. And it also does an analysis of the impacts to the contract time. And if there are impacts, we have to show a critical path schedule that describes what the impact is to the contract time. We also do independent cost justifications of the change order. So before we go to the contractor, we do our own estimate. Contractor does their estimate, we get together, and then we negotiate the price. So we look at each other's costs and figure out, where we're wrong or right, and reach a agreed price for the change orders. And then within the city, we actually, so if we're using a consultant to manage the contract, they typically do the first round on the scope and the cost justification. And then it comes to the city, we have an engineer on my staff will review that. That engineer will make a recommendation to me. And then I also review it with the finances contract analyst to look at the budget and see how it affects our budget. So, cost management by managing risk. This is probably the biggest bang for your buck in controlling costs on a construction project. Well, and even in design. And the first thing is identifying the sources of risk, and this is on every base of the contract. So in design, we look at, are we doing undergrounding? That's always one of the riskiest pieces of work we do on a construction project. We look at, are we working next to a gas station where there might be the potential for contaminants? So anything like that that really has a potential for that kind of risk, we start looking at those and figuring out what we can do to mitigate them. At the time of bid, we look at the contract bid information that I mentioned earlier and how we might react to that. Most of the contractors we've been working with are good contractors, but there are bad contractors out there to work with. And sometimes when you get a contractor that's known to be difficult to work with, probably the most important thing you do is make sure you have the resources devoted to your project management team. And I've done construction management for most of my career and over 20 years. And one of the things I've learned is you need to spend money in that project management element to save money in the construction element. Your biggest risk is delay and issues you have in the construction element. And when you have federal funding, it's even more important because you're constantly being threatened with, losing your federal funding if you're not complying. So in federal funds, the amount of oversight it takes on a federally funded project is unbelievable when you think you have to have pieces of documentation for every piece of material that goes in the ground. And so we have to have inspectors on site, and we represent this to the state and the feds when they review our project, that we've looked at them, that we've pulled tags off of rebar, that we've looked at poles to be sure they were stamped by an approved inspector. And every screw that goes into the ground, we need a certification for. I mean, there's just every piece of material has to be certified in some way on a federal contract. So you don't want to not have enough people out there doing your inspection and managing your project. And with that in mind, so your project management team needs to have the right expertise. If you're doing undergrounding, it helps to have people who are experienced in utility work and can come up with creative solutions when you run into problems. You need to be sure that you have enough resources and probably that they are creative and are able to make prompt decisions, which is the next thing on this list. Making prompt decisions on a construction contract, that's what really prevents big overruns, because the biggest overruns you have are in delay. So the second you hit something and you have to stop your contractor, you have people and equipment that are sitting out there, and it could cost you $10,000 to $20,000 and sometimes upwards of $50,000 a day. The quicker you make the decision, the more you're not dealing with those sorts of costs. Also along that line is having good agreements with our utility purveyors. This again is associated with undergrounding work. And probably the biggest thing on here is holding the utility accountable for the project schedule. So you need to set in there what their schedule is and what their response times are. And this is also offers some predictability to the contractor, because you tell your contractor, okay, you're gonna have to leave this 2-month window open for Seattle City Light to do their work on the project. And you're gonna have to give them the space to do it, and you're gonna have to not be out there in their way when they're doing it. You won't be able to remove poles until they've done that, which means you can't put your sidewalks in, things like that. And so it helps them plan their schedule, it gives them the predictability, and it keeps the utilities at the table helping us answer questions when the problems come, so we don't have delays. The other thing I put on this list is planning for underground conversions, and this I was thinking with your private parties. So one of the things that we've done differently on phase 2 is the people on phase 2, the businesses and residents that are underground. First Avenue phase 2. They've committed to using our contractor to do their undergrounding work. So they have the option of using a private party or our contractor, but they chose to use our contractor, and they're going to pay the city to do that work. But it puts the schedule into our contractor's control. So now our contractor can do it at their time, and we're not waiting for some of the private parties to deal with it. So that makes a huge difference. And then the last thing I have on here is continuously updating our project estimates. So I have our project managers and consultants constantly coming to me with cost to complete. So at least once a month, we do a cost to complete on the First Avenue South project, so we see where it's going. And it gives us the opportunity to mitigate anything we see that might be a problem. Okay, and the last slide I have here is the other cost controls. And these aren't meant to be diminished because they're huge. Probably the biggest cost control is complying with policies, laws, and guidelines of all of our granting agencies. And our granting agencies, WashDOT and the federal granting agencies, we have manuals that are probably anywhere from 500 to 1,000 pages each that we have to, we sign agreements saying we're going to comply with. And those talk about how to address change orders and when we compensate the contractor and when we don't compensate the contractor and what constitutes illegal additional change orders to the project. Another one I put on here is value engineering. We don't do this on a lot of little projects, but we do it on the larger projects. And especially projects funded by the State Transportation Improvement Board, they typically require it and they will fund it as part of the grant. And what this is on a larger project when you're anywhere between, I want to say 30 and 60% design roughly. You'll have your concepts down and you'll bring in a group of, I won't say disinterested parties, but other experts from other cities or other places. So you might bring in somebody from utility and the stormwater engineer from Tukwila and a streets engineer from Federal Way. And you bring these people into a room for probably a couple days. It's typically facilitated, and they look at your design concepts and come up with cost reduction proposals. They come up with a whole bunch of ideas. They vet them very shortly in a 2-day period with this facilitator. And at the end, they give you a little package of list of things that your design consultant should look at. And I think in general, when I've had those, I've got anywhere from 15 to 20 concepts, and we implement anywhere from probably 3 to 10 of them, depending on what they are. But again, that's a process that's typically only done on larger projects. The other thing we do as we're moving forward on a project is look for opportunities to reduce in case we get into a situation where we're pushing our budget a little bit. And so and not every project has this, but sometimes at the end we'll have landscaping or architectural features. So we kind of keep those in the back of our mind, and if we think we're getting close, we would come to council and say, hey, this budget, has gone over because of something we encountered. Maybe we can look at reducing the amount of landscaping, or the type of landscaping, or architectural features. So there are opportunities if we keep kind of looking out in front to see what's out there. You can reduce the length of a project, although typically granting agencies won't agree with that. We have the budget amendment process, so as you know, I've been to you recently, we have a couple budget amendments for this year, adding in some work that we weren't planning on this year that we got grants for, but that if we're going to be working outside the budget, we come to you with a budget amendment, that's how you approve those. And then these last three kind of go together, these internal tracking sheets. I've always had internal tracking sheets at cities, but I have to say the ones at Burien are some of the best I work with. This city, every single invoice we pay, a tracking sheet gets attached to it, and that tracking sheet includes all the expenditures on a project to date. It shows the budget, and then our staff reconciles those with the accounting system to make sure that they're consistent with what the accounting system is showing. And I found that really effective in looking at each of the bills, you know right where you are at that moment, so it's very helpful. So, that's all I have. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions or comments? Councilmember Law.
Mr. Mayor, this is Andrews, thank you for coming tonight. My big concern is that we've had several projects that have vastly exceeded their budgets. And as I asked when I made this request that we discussed it, is what specific things are we doing in Burien so that we don't have those problems? You gave the example of in phase 2 that we're encouraging the use of the city contractor to move forward with the project. Can you cite some other examples? And I know that a lot of this happened before you came on, but things that maybe you have implemented or you saw that were implemented in response to these issues. That's my biggest concern, is that we won't keep making the same mistakes.
So in,
Thanks for pointing that out, Councilmember Block. Maya wasn't here for these. And the thing, Maya wouldn't say this about herself, but she completed the Coal Creek Parkway project, a $43 million project, was Maya's. As was everybody that drives to the South Center Mall during Christmas season. That was Maya's project, and she was working for CH2 New York. And so when she quickly says she's got 20 years of project management, that's not a small thing. She has by far and away more project management than any other public works director that's ever worked at the city, hands down. The First Avenue project is one I want to mention because, by all estimates, that was something which we would have handled differently in retrospect. So a 15-year-old city takes on a $30 million project. We really didn't know it was in the ground there because there were no as-builts. Probably could have potholed a lot more, and that's why I asked Maya to clarify that. We didn't know if there was even burial ground out there. There very well could have been, but we did find there were stumps, contamination. Could have been managed better internally. But extraordinarily complex project. The public works director at the time had a planning background. Was not didn't even have an engineering license, which is not terribly uncommon, but not preferable when getting into a big project like that. That one was set to go wrong in about 5 different ways. And we had a tough contractor to work with, and it got tougher as we went along. So, but I wanted to pause there just to reinforce the point that you made, which is Maya wasn't here. She is head and shoulders above the project managers we've had in the past. And she's going to be able to tell you about a couple of things that we're doing at First Avenue that are radically different than what occurred in the first phase of the project. I would also like to point out that Councilmember Block and Deputy Mayor Clark recently attended the ribbon cutting for 132nd, which was a great project done largely with CDBG money, but also with school district money. Completed on time, within budget. It was sidewalks in the street on the way to an elementary school. We've done 4th Avenue since then. And the second phase of the first phase project underway on budget within schedule, and likewise the second phase of First Avenue north of 2026.
So, and I appreciate the comments. So I can't promise you that every project's going to be on budget, obviously, but I can assure you that I will come to you and explain why they're not on budget, and we'll have good reasons for what those costs are. But from my observation, and you're right, I wasn't here, but the things I see that are kind of different, I can flip back to this previous slide, starting with identifying the project management team. So I think staffing and putting the right resources on the project are really, really important. And that's how I've always done my project management, and that's how we're doing it now. So I look at the project. Honestly, right now, we've had a pretty light staff on first. There's some things going on out there right now that aren't bad, but they require additional documentation and kind of a higher level of inspection. So I've increased the resources right now, and I plan on decreasing them again, watching the budget as I do this. But I have a consultant kind of vary, depending on what I see are the biggest risks. So parts of the project are less risky than others. The other thing you need to watch is when there's lots of work going on. You get some contractors who their approach is to do 3 shifts and work people in 6 different spots. Then you need to adjust your resources to match that. So that is really important to me, is spending the money on project management to save it from having a construction issue. Also on the slide, I think, well, making prompt decisions obviously goes with having a good team to do it. Yeah, so managing the underground utilities, which is down here on the list, having agreements with utility purveyors. So our city attorney has drafted new agreements for the first project as an example that I think are far better and really get to the point about what we need the utilities to do. And the most important thing is that they're in the game with us. They're not sitting back at their office, but they're available to respond when we have a problem. So
yeah, and I'm hoping one of the two of you will stop me in this part. We had a strategy on First Avenue, the first phase, which was that the city could act as kind of clearing house. We had 6 major utilities going on out there. Very complicated because they're trying to do work and coordinate that work, and they're running into each other. And, there's a big juggling act going on there. And we thought that by taking on the role of coordinators, that we would, in fact, increase the efficiency out there. So it was a good idea. Had everybody been willing to partner and work together towards the same end, it would have been a great idea. But what turned out in that case was that it gave some utilities a wonderful opportunity to say, I couldn't do my work because the other utility was in the way. And later that showed up as delays and possibly costs like that. But we didn't take that strategy on the First Avenue and second phase. And that's a significant difference. So we've evolved, and Craig was heavily involved in this, in negotiating those agreements before the project started. So I would say that we were much better prepared to enter into these projects than we were some of those things.
So pretty much everything on this page, well, most of them you were doing in some way in the past. I think we're doing it better today, and especially in the agreements regard. The other thing, just as an aside, our franchise with Seattle City Light is up in another year, a little more than a year, and a group of the cities that has Seattle City Light franchises, we decided to kind of work together through some of the issues associated with the franchise. And this is one of them, is how to have Seattle City Light more at the table working with us, and how to address issues when we're doing these construction projects so that we can get answers quick, because that's the big thing, is we'll find something out there, we can't put a facility in for them the way they want it. We can't just stop work for a week while they think about it. We need to be able to get somebody out there who has quick responses. And that's a common problem among all the cities, and we're talking with Seattle City Light about how we can incorporate those concepts into an agreement in the franchise.
And going way into the details on that, Maya was educated me. When we talk about, for example, underground utilities, there's lots of ways to underground utilities. There's expensive ways and there are less expensive ways. The way we do it with Seattle is largely a very expensive way. It's done absolutely Cadillac fashion. And one of the things we want to talk with them about is doing it in a way that gives us more control and accomplishes the same thing, but perhaps not the way we've been doing it in the past.
Yes. And again, the other thing in those agreements too that we need to and are going to be doing moving forward is making sure that we get good timelines in there so our contractor has some predictability about when City Light will, or any of the utilities, Comcast or others, will do their work. Interestingly enough, and another aside, one of the biggest problems we have is multiple utilities on the poles and getting them to coordinate with each other about who's responsible at the very end to take the pole down. And there seems to be an enormous amount of agreements that already exist, say, between Seattle City Light and other providers about people being on their poles. And once Seattle City Light's off the poles, they kind of put their hands, not my pole anymore, it's somebody else's pole. And it's a very frustrating problem. It's something we're expressing with Seattle City Light. We haven't figured out a way to resolve it yet, but we feel kind of like we don't have any control because we don't even know who that person is sometimes left up on the pole. And we want to take the pole down and we're holding this up. So that's one that we haven't got the perfect solution for, but we're certainly pushing forward, trying to get some ideas. And working with a group of cities, I think, is a good thing to be doing on that. So I think those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head from this list of how we made some changes that I've seen.
Okay, and then, we've talked about the issues with undergrounding and such. We had a significant cost overrun with our Anamon overlay project. What programs do we have in place to address the overruns that occurred in that type of project?
Pretty similar, that one I'm not as familiar with, but pretty similar to this in that we look at the type of team. I know one of the things I saw when I first got here, and I wasn't involved in the project, but I did see some of the tail end records of it. We probably should have staffed that a little higher. We had a contractor who was doing a lot of work in a lot of places, and we had a lot of changes going on. So on that particular one, it looked like we did hit some unexpected things. There was an enormous amount of IT or signal conduit, electrical conduit, that instead of being the typical 2 to 3 feet down where it should have been under code, was actually up in the sidewalk. And so when they started doing it, they hit that, and there was numerous, I think that was a fairly big change order, was where all this conduit was hit, and we needed to react to that quicker. And I think stormwater, there were facilities that we found that were really bad. I would say on that, generally, I will, as we move forward, try to investigate that stuff in much more detail during design ahead of time.
Yeah, and that falls into the category of assessing the risk better up front. And the perfect example that I just mentioned was the stormwater. So what happened was we got in there, and this is typical of county roads, and they started to scrape off the level of the first layer of asphalt. And the county over the years wasn't laying asphalt in a nice level layer. It kind of didn't follow the contour, it didn't follow the contour of the property, and they had to smooth it out underneath. So we'd be scraping along and expecting that we'd still have 2 inches of asphalt below it, and all of a sudden we hit dirt. Because the asphalt might be up to 9 inches in some place and 1.5 inches in other places. So when we got in, so that was one problem. The same that was largely true about utilities on First Avenue, very much true about storm drains. We got in there and found out that the storm drains were entirely collapsed in many areas. In fact, there were several extreme examples where storm drains were simply asphalted over. So rather than slow down the machine that was doing the asphalting, when the county lost it, they went over the drains. That's how bad it was. And then council may well recall the debacle we had with the sidewalks and the trees, which was not something we had counted on. But when we got in there, we could see that the problems that we're having with the sidewalks that also contained some of the conduit that Maya just mentioned needed to come out. And we're glad we did it. In retrospect, it turned out beautifully. We replaced the trees and not going to crack the asphalt or the sidewalk. It was a lot more expensive. And I think to Maya's point, not making any excuses about it, we should have spent more time on that project assessing the risk going into it, because it turned out to be a lot more expensive than we thought it was. All understandable things. In roads as old as we have around here, some of which were built 40, 50, 60 years ago, we don't have the as-builts. The as-builts are the documents that when you're all through with the building or road or whatever it is, take exactly to an inch where everything is. So we can go back and we can pull up the as-builts from this room, and we can tell you exactly where the conduits are, exactly what color they are, and exactly how many of them are in each hole. We didn't have that information, and we won't have it. As we go up further on First Avenue, if we're on 128, any of those, but especially ones that carry major utilities or drainage, we're going to, in Maya's first comment, which you can't even see, was how much contingency we got in this project. judging it from the first phase, might want to bump that up. And so, right from the get-go, she was telling me that, given the risk that we are unaware of, the things that we don't know out there, we may need to adjust our contingency. So I think those are things that are worth noting in that particular project.
One last question. You had just talked about how we have overrules, we have passport documents, which is understandable, this being that for 100 years. Is it possible to use technology such as ground penetrating radar or ultrasound to get an idea of what is under our streets?
I haven't ever used that. I think potholing is probably, it's cheaper and pretty much achieves the same thing for what we need to do. The big thing is you gotta weigh how much money you're gonna spend, and so, and it would be the same with something like ground penetrating radar. It's all about figuring out, and obviously, had I been here, I probably would have done more of it for these projects. But it's always that balance of, because I have seen in one of the other cities I work with, I have seen cities spend too much money, I think, in design where, the risk on the other end might have been $100,000, but they probably spent an extra $1 million trying to find out, prevent that risk. And so it's a really careful balance. We try to do the best we can. I'm not going to promise you that I won't overrun, but we try to do the best we can. I can say on the overlay, I did an overlay on 99 when I worked for Department of Transportation that wasn't shoreline at the time, but is shoreline now. Same thing. We had done all kinds of potholing. We had this much pavement everywhere we potholed. Somehow in 300-foot chunks, we had this much pavement, and I ground down and had nothing, and we had a whole bunch of 99 traffic on gravel for a couple weeks on end as we worked along the woodland parks we were up in that area and then into shoreline. So it happens. You try to not make it happen, and again, you just kind of weigh the risk.
Well, my big concern is we're hoping to do projects on 153rd and 51st. We discovered not only did a lot, but we did 152nd that there were a lot of mystery infrastructure issues and potholing for that specific spot, as you said, we'll find at that specific spot, whereas something like ground penetrating radar or ultrasound would give a clearer picture. Maybe some of that mystery infrastructure would show up. So, I'm happy that we recognize that we have issues and we're taking measures to address them. I can't get that again because you saved me from hell. None. So anyway, thank you very much for taking the time out there.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, comments, I'd just like to make one general comment. I think it was a very helpful discussion. I really appreciate all this information. And I think it's very important that we try to do the best job possible and we consider all these issues, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that in the private sector or the public sector, the projects are very difficult to manage. Contractors fail, and so that's just something we always need to keep in mind. In my view, working for a variety of different public sector and private sector companies and agencies, City of Burien staff is one of the most competent and efficient staffs I've ever seen. And so I just want to make that known to you guys and let you know that we really appreciate your hard work for our community. With that, we'll move on to the last business agenda item, which is city business.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just highlight a couple items and take your questions. Item C on page 167, I had mentioned that the boiler up at the annex had failed and that it had been repaired. The repair is in place and it's working once again. I mentioned this one because this was another example of, I think, the city being extraordinarily nimble. We could have legitimately expected this to be knocked out for a solid month or 6 weeks, and it was taken care of in about a week in large part because Steve Romer spearheaded this thing, got it moving. Craig was able to expedite contracts and in short, get the job taken care of, and it's really something that's worth noting. Item E is the project I mentioned earlier, the overlay on 132nd Street. Councilmember Block and Deputy Mayor Park were there and stood in the rain while the elementary school band played jingle bells and something. It was still before Thanksgiving. Oh, Yankee Doodle.
And
Good
Love
time.
You Tender.
Oh, yeah.
They played Love You Tender. A good time was had by all. It was a lot of fun. First Avenue Phase 2, item F, either project we mentioned is substantially complete. Still some pickup work to be done on that. Everybody will have noticed by now that there is a new signal at 151st and First Avenue getting mixed reviews from our residents, but something that was part of the project and it's there now are the street lights along that stretch. Item G, First Avenue South Phase 2, that's the northern part up there, north of 148, 146. We've been contacting businesses and other parties, letting them know there'll be a brief, depending on how you look at it, there'll be a power outage up there in the next couple of days, and everybody's been contacted, and really tried to be flexible in meeting their needs, and I think we did a good job on that. Maya mentioned item H, the Seattle Citywide franchise. We are a lot more informed than we were the last time the franchise was up, as are our partners, and we expect to have a much improved franchise as a result of that. And with that, I would be glad to take council questions.
Any questions or comments? City business. Deputy Mayor Park.
I have several comments. The first one is that I want to correct what one of the public commenters said. Study sessions were established so that council members could speak among themselves, because at regular sessions, we do have public comments. Sometimes it's very lengthy. We have very long agendas and little time to discuss them on ourselves. So the purpose of the study session, which I fought very hard for, was for council members to try to dig into a subject that we were looking at and have a more in-depth discussion, rather than to have a discussion between the public and the council. I wanted to comment on potential policies that we were looking at the study session. I would like to add some to what we had last week. For years and years and years, and I don't remember how far back this goes, we have assumed that it took 3 people to cause staff to look into whatever the issue. I think it was something that must have evolved over time, and it has worked well for us to have 3 council members agreeing before we send our small staff out to do research on an issue, so I would like to add that as a policy. And I would like to for us, either as a policy or during the retreat, to think about electronic devices, like setting a council members texting or looking at blogs or what have you, to determine if we are to be independent thinkers, which was again mentioned earlier. I think that these electronic devices should be turned off. And you provided us with RCWs for the council mayor type of government. I would like to see also the RCWs for the elected mayor. And one other thing is that during our budget discussion, I mentioned the potential for having a budget committee next year, helping us look at budgeting, how much money we have, how much money we need, and we have a year and a half window before we look into the next budget cycle. And involving our citizens might give us ideas for how better to proceed. And my last last item is on the libraries. I did go over to Issaquah for their last meeting. And they determined they had 3 options on the table. One was to leave it where it is. One was to move it to the north, and one was to move it to the south. And they determined to move it to the north, anticipating that at some point the Seattle would come down and annex, and then they would let Seattle take over that facility. I have concerns about this. I don't know why the 2 Seattle and King County systems can't work together, because no matter whether it moves north or whether it moves south, a large number of people that have been paying taxes for a long number of years are losing out on the service because the 2 systems can't work together to let King County patrons visit Seattle and vice versa. So I have a concern about that and about Boulevard Park. So I would like to encourage council to write a letter to KCLS asking them to begin work as soon as possible on Boulevard Park. That community has been waiting since 2004 to move that forward. And to date, nothing has been done. And the very last thing is, there was discussion of a community process at the Issaquah meeting whereby the public or some mechanism could be found to bring public people together to help determine the location. I think that should be part of the discussion also. And that's all I have.
Councilmember Edgar.
Right, this seemed to be the kind of catch-all portion of the meeting, but one thing I did want to bring up, last meeting, when we were talking about the comprehensive plan, or a couple meetings ago, there seemed to be some confusion about the date of the public hearing for the comprehensive plan amendments.
If you're not, I don't know the date off the top of my head, but I know there was confusion.
We agreed on January 28th.
Yeah, that's what I recall.
Okay, because the approved minutes that we saw for the meeting of the 19th says that we're going to have further discussion on the 21st, but it was unclear if there was going to be hearing also, or going to be hearing after.
I'll go back and check the record and make sure that's well
So the
publicized.
28th was the, okay, so if I understand that right, that's a 4th meeting, 4th week of the month, so the study session will be preempted by.
That's correct, and I do remember that much of the monitor mentioned.
Okay, so if that's the case, then I would like to recommend that discussion on the economic development strategies be moved to the regular meeting proposed schedule, the little piece of paper, and scheduled sometime for January or February meeting. Currently, with the first 2 study sessions of the 2013 year being preempted, the council's next meeting for study session will not be held for another 16 weeks, which was the end of March. I think that's too long for us to wait to talk about what kind of strategies we would expect a consultant to come up with, especially if there's intent to get them hired and working. So my suggestion is that we put that on the agenda as a regular meeting topic, sometime during January, February.
Councilmember Edgar, so I guess, so I think we have, for the next meeting, we will consider proposed agendas. I guess at this point, we should check in and make sure, I don't see much on the agenda for the next meeting, so do we still plan
Yeah, I was
on?
going to wait until council is through that. We don't have an item planned for the 17th, except for city business. I was going to point that out to you after council got through speaking.
Okay, so let's go ahead. We've got a number of comments here. I guess if anyone wants to comment on that. whether they would like to still have the 17th meeting, and then we can go ahead and consider future agendas if we're not going to have the meeting.
And I noticed that also, and I figured that if it gets canceled, then I didn't want to lose the opportunity to talk about getting something out of it.
We wouldn't want you to lose that opportunity either. Okay, so is that your comments for now?
For now.
Okay. Councilmember Jacoby.
Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't sure about the public hearing in January, and so it sounds like it's on the 28th. Is it possible, historically our public hearings are pretty quick. Is it possible to have the public hearing and the study session on the same day? I think like Rose, you're saying, study sessions are really important, so it'd be good to.
Well, this is the one that I just, I'll refresh council's memory. We had a discussion about actively soliciting, in addition to the normal notification we make, but actively soliciting property owners or other interested parties whose properties are affected by down zones directly invited along with other people who may be directly affected by this in a non-theoretical sort of way. So I would expect that this would be a fairly lengthy public hearing. That said, we're glad to schedule it for whenever you'd like to have it. I thought that we had reasoned that we would send out, and I don't have the exact days in my head, but I think council said you wanted a notification sent out on the 14th for a meeting on the 28th, if that's the correct date, I believe it is. But that said, we're glad to do whatever this council would like.
Well, if I can, the majority of the council instructed staff to send out notice at least 2 weeks before the hearing. That was the reason for setting it for January 28th. And these are individual notices to individual property owners who are going to be directly affected by zoning changes. I would hate to end up in a meeting where we're going to either have to cut off a study session because we're going way into the night, or we're trying to speed up a public hearing and cutting off people who need to be heard. So I would like to keep that focus on that issue. That's going to be very important to the people that are getting the notices, and it's important to the city.
On that note, are there any holidays in January?
The 21st is a holiday.
So having a study session sometime in February, or January or February, because I think, like you mentioned, those study sessions are important, and Bob, we're also saying that. And I appreciate when we allow citizens to comment during study sessions when they're commenting on a specific topic, but because it provides information that I might not be aware of. So I would encourage us to continue supporting citizen comments on the specific topic that we're talking about at study sessions. Two other things. I was also at the library meeting, and what I remember hearing was that the board is deciding to study the current location or north. So, and then Seattle and King County Library System actually have an agreement where there's shared use of the facilities. It's just that King County Library System people from Seattle don't get to put holds on. So there is an agreement between the two to share the services. And then I noticed in the minutes on for November 26th during our study session on page 36, staff will seek council's input on the scope of services for the Economic Development Strategic Plan and Community Animal Resource Education Society, which is CARES, for the audit contracts. So when would staff like to see that input and how?
The input for the economic development, the scope of work will come to you probably in January and measure. And that's what I was thinking of, would be more productive in terms of some sort of, whatever form that would take as an agenda item or discussion item. we don't have a lot else to offer in terms of what we're doing, but that is coming up and it'll be significant. CARES is has already got a contract with a scope, and per council's direction on the November 26th meeting, we're prepared to move forward in the first or second week of February.
So on that scope, I did a little research on the person that we're bringing in, and it sounds like that person has experience in sheltering animals, but not so much animal care, animal control. So what have we established to ensure that this person is going to be auditing for animal control and the sheltering needs?
Well, we had submitted a resume to council on a couple of, or at least one occasion, and talked about it twice. But what I know off the top of my head is I've known her or met her, and I'm welcome to, we'd be glad to actually take you down so you could satisfy yourself. She is considered to be among the very best. Her particular agency contracts with a number of cities whose animal control officers have access to the facility, and they have a very, very close working relationship with them. I know that because I saw them and I was there. And so I would say she's very well qualified, and I think you'll be very happy with her work. But again, I've said this to other council members. I would be delighted to take you down there to meet with her in person and to see her facility. It'll knock your socks off. And I think you'd be very impressed with her. She just kind of has that feeling of somebody who's worked around animals every day for 34 years. And she's solid and got a good sense of humor and knows her stuff and is well respected in the field.
Councilmember Block. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First thing, First Avenue South, Phase 1, Part 2, are we going to have a ribbon cutting on the projects?
If council would like one, I hadn't planned on it.
Well, I think after 7 years, a lot of money, I think we should at least consider
So
some.
I should get my
Yes, you ran out the proper
If
time.
council wants to do that, it's fine. I hadn't planned on it.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. You had talked about items on the agenda items on the next meeting. I'd like to suggest that we have a discussion on putting the issue of adding 2 officers on the agenda. Chief Kimmer, as I understand it, we have till January to make a decision on whether or not to take the grant.
I think it's the end of this month, and we are in communication with them right now, so.
Okay, well,
the city is.
there is an issue of time on this, moving forward with this, so I think we should, at the very least, we owe it to our citizens to have the discussion. We have the opportunity to add 2 more officers. I'd like to have us move forward with that. I think that issue alone is enough to justify having a meeting. The other thing is, I asked several questions of the city attorney, and I got a response back from the city manager that this required action on these questions from the council, which is a new policy. I've always been under the impression that council members, in order to do their job, are allowed to ask questions, and that this is how we gather information so we can move forward. Any of the questions involved an interlocal agreement, how that works in regards to annexation. As I understand it, it is possible to move forward with an annexation without a vote of the people, either through an interlocal agreement with the county or with the fire district in the affected area. So I'd like to request some clarification on that. Also, another item I'd like clarification on is I understand the annexation sales tax credit requires 2 cities to designate the area as a potential annexation area. Since one of the reasons given for justifying us moving forward at great expense on the annexation issue was a concern over Seattle annexing North Highline by removing the designation by Burien of the PAA would, as I understand the law, remove the sales tax credit, thus even lowering the likelihood of Seattle moving forward even more. So I'd like to request clarification on that. And the third issue is seeing how this whole issue of annexation is torn apart our community. I'd like to give an opportunity to let the people come forward and give a voice on what occurs as far as adding to the city. And I think that it would behoove us to add a policy that any annexation of any area outside our current corporate boundaries be subject first to an advisory vote by the citizens of Burien. So I'd like some clarification on what procedure we would be to move forward with such policy. So those are my questions.
Yeah, simple, and it would be the response that I gave, I sent to the entire council. We're glad to provide that information. That will take some research. And generally, when we have issues requested of staff that require a fair amount of time, we look to the council to give us direction. And that's what we do in this case.
Yeah, and I'd like to say my entire time on council, that has been the policy for a reason, because we have very limited staff. They're not here to just keep us informed, they're here to do the jobs and serve the community, and so we need to always keep that in mind. And so, so I've got Councilmember Block's questions here, which we'll go ahead and listen to everyone's comments, and then we'll consider each of them whether we want to ask staff to do that work. Councilmember Ross.
Okay, I have a few things. First one is actually kind of relates to this. I talked before about making some adjustments in the B&O tax system that we have. I've done some of my own research on it. And there's some limitations on what we can do with different rates. The statute requires that there be a single uniform rate for retail sales, but it doesn't specify a single uniform rate for other businesses. One thing that I can't get independently is information on how many taxpayers there are, how many returns we get at different levels of income, how much tax they pay. So I'd like to get that from city staff.
If I could ask for the same considerations I just mentioned for Councilmember Block's request, that would be helpful to see.
Yeah. So if we can bring that up. Second thing I want to talk about was the library. I also attended the library board meeting, and it's, you know, kind of in the nature, I guess, of a board of appointees that aren't elected to represent any particular area, but even though we have a representative from Burien on the board, she declines to advocate for or represent this area with respect to library issues. The measure that the urging that Mr. Potasic put forward to the board, the direction he gave them was to look only at rebuilding the library somewhere north of Burien city limits. I frankly was puzzled by that, and it strikes me as rather mysterious since the library board currently has an interlocal agreement with the city of Seattle that if any annexation takes place before 2015, before the sales tax credit runs out, that all library facilities in the annexed area would be turned over to the city of Seattle. And so I'm wondering why should our tax dollars as taxpayers to the King County library system, our tax money would be used to build a branch library, a multi-million-dollar investment. Well, there's a distinct possibility that they would end up turning that over to the city of Seattle with no compensation at all to the taxpayers who fund the library district. Mr. Potasic was adamant, almost strident in his urging that they not look at locating it inside the city of Burien, so it'll stay in what is now the unincorporated area and potentially be subject to surrender to the city of Seattle. And that goes into my next comments, which were on Councilmember Block's comments about annexation. Frankly, that combined with the tax credit actually makes annexation of that area by Seattle more likely. And again, this is an area I've done my own research on, and he's correct. Annexation can be done through an interlocal agreement without the consent of people. All that's required is an agreement between King County and the city of Seattle. If Burien has a potential annexation area for that area, then we would have a seat at that table and we would have to be part of that agreement. If we don't have a potential annexation area for that area, then we don't even have to be told about it. Each body has to do a public hearing, one public hearing in their own legislative body. So Seattle City Council, King County Council each hold one public hearing. There'd be no requirement for an election or anything else. We'd have no say in it. Annexation of that area to Seattle will cost us money, especially in terms of fire department services, as we would end up having to build our fire district, which is we paid for, would end up having to build a new fire station up there. And what the statute requires, and this again is the result of my own independent research on it, the statute requires is that there be two cities that designated as a potential annexation area as of November 1st, 2008. It says nothing about there being two cities on it at the time of the annexation. So taking a PAA off now would not affect Seattle's ability to get the full tax credit, which along with getting a free library building, I think increases the possibility that they would go ahead and annex that area through an interlocal agreement. And then as for council requests, I agree with this if it's, you know, we have a staff here to run the city and we operate on a very thin staff as it is. And it's a disservice to the residents and taxpayers of Burien if we as council members are diverting city staff off onto our own errands. And virtually everything, we have access to the RCWs and the WACs and court decisions and papers that talk about these different subjects through the MRSC. We're all capable of doing some of that research ourselves, and frankly, I think that city staff, especially when you're in the early exploratory stages of something and trying to figure out if it's worth bringing forward, that's not something we should be burdening staff with if we're capable of handling that ourselves. And I think as council members, it behooves us to do a little of our own work, a little of our own research on these things rather than just dumping everything off on our city staff. Thank you.
Councilmember Andrew.
Thank you. Going back to a different topic, I also, in viewing the minutes of the November 26th meeting, saw that staff was, and actually I thank staff that they were willing to seek input on the scope of services, and you listed both of those. So I took it upon myself to add a couple of items that I thought may have been more animal control-ish than just the shelter. So I'll be submitting those, and I can be part of the meeting record.
Deputy Mayor Clark.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that in your list of stuff we're asking for, that I mentioned a letter to KCLS, and for the second time I brought up the idea of a budget committee. I would like to know if I have any support for that. If not, I'll drop it.
Okay, so we have a number of potential requests here for other staff work for the future agenda topics. So I guess the first thing we should settle is whether we're going to have a meeting on the 17th. If so, we can discuss future agendas at that meeting. So Councilmember Block had to discuss the addition of 2 police officers on the 17th. And I wanted to get input from Mr. Martin. Is that a decision that needs to be made by the end of December, where we're at in that process?
If council wants to hire cops off the federal program, if I understand you correctly, we would need to take action instantly. I think we're probably, if we had a meeting on the 17th and you gave me direction that night, we might be able to get it done, I don't know. We talked about this during the budget session, and we would have brought this issue to you in a different fashion had we known council had been interested in it, but I think Councilmember Block is correct. We did discuss it during the council deliberation of the budget, and it was not agreed to, and so we as staff no longer paid any attention to the deadline that was passing. We hired 1 of the 3 eligible positions. At the time, we had noted that the cost being offered, the revenue being offered by the federal government for an officer was $43,000 a year for 3 years. 3 years? Or
$25,000 a year for 3 years.
$25,000 for 3 years. The actual cost of an officer is closer to $200,000 a year, and that the impact on the general fund would have been many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that discussion during the budget process defeated this idea. So we as staff kind of took our hands off this. I'm not sure, I no longer am sure when the exact deadline is for the COPS grant. We could certainly bring it and try it if that was what the council wanted to do.
I didn't recall that we discussed the grant. I recall that Councilman Block raised the issue of kind of funding 2 police officers through a licensed cab, or kind of shifted licensed cab money. I recall that discussion. I don't recall the grant discussion as part of the budget.
And I think that came up, and Kim had told council that the strategy of moving those funds around didn't save money per se, and that it would have increased the impact to the fund balance that we were using to balance the budget at that time significantly. And all we do is, if council wants to review this again, that's fine. There's no problem with that. I'm just saying that it was my impression that council had discarded it, and I'm explaining why it is that council, or why staff, didn't bring this back in a fashion that we knew for a fact could make the federal deadline, because I'm not sure we can do that now.
Okay.
But with that said, if council would like this brought back on the 17th, we'd be glad to do that.
Councilman Robson?
Yeah, we did discuss this during the budget discussion, and the fact that the grants pay like 10% of the cost of hiring these additional officers. It's kind of like buying a second refrigerator because you get 10% off on it. Frankly, I don't think we need to discuss it any further. This is something that we can come up at the supplemental budget next year or the biennial budget in 2 years, or police staffing. We won't have this grant, but frankly, this grant doesn't seem to me like it really gives us any help, any meaningful help on hiring police officers.
It's $43,000 a year per officer.
Yeah, I guess a $250,000 cost per officer.
Well, the cost of providing an officer is $218,000. The amount cited by the city manager during his report was $180,000.
Yeah, I think it's in the vicinity of Councilman Block's right. I think it is $43,000 a year, but I think per officer for 3 years, in the city would then have to make up $120,000 a year per officer for the 3 years of the grant, and then we'd have to assume the full cost of the officer at the end of the grant
for 2 years, 3 more years on top of that. So anyway, I feel that it's a cost well worth taking. They talk about how the cost of freedom isn't cheap. Well, neither is the cost of staying safe. And we have a dire need for more officers in our city. Right now, if I can recall correctly, we are staffed at 1.2 officers per 1,000. The FBI recommends 2 officers per 1,000. We have a reactive police force. I would like to have additional officers so that we can do crime prevention rather than crime reaction. You know, as a statistics, I want to point out that we can all relate to in 2011, our police force only wrote 1,136 tickets. That's for the entire city of Burien. And what that indicates to me is that our officers are too busy reacting to calls instead of doing proactive policing. We need more police officers. This isn't going to solve all our problems, but it's a start in the right direction, and it's a direction we need to go. So I support at least having the discussion at our next meeting, and I will support hiring the 2 officers.
Okay, so I guess the question for us now is whether we want to try to discuss this on December 17th. And I guess we don't know for sure whether that will give us the time to accomplish that. So as far as we've had a discussion about what kind of support we need to add agenda items. I think we used historically 3. Is that correct? But there's no rule on that?
Yeah, I had what I thought was the list of the council's questions council was asking. And Council, or Deputy Mayor Clark had asked, we add that to the matrix of policy questions that council consider in the future when we return to that discussion.
Okay, so for now, since my understanding is we used it historically, so if 3 members support it, we'll add it to the agenda. If you have any opposition to that. So first we have Councilmember Block's request to add this issue to our December 17th meeting as an agenda topic. Do we have support to do that? So 2. No further, so we will not discuss it on the 17th. Next item is the Councilmember Block's question about whether an interlocal agreement is a possibility. I think we've had discussion on it.
That one might be simplified. We're just looking for direction. Councilman Block had 3 questions.
Yes.
If there is direction from council for us to go research that, that's all.
Yeah, and so the first question was at the interlocal agreement, do we have 3 members' support for staff to go look into that? The issue that you actually settled for us, that interlocal agreement is a possibility, what was my understanding. And I guess Councilmember Block wants further clarification on that. Okay. City attorney. Okay, so do we have 3 members' support for the staff to do that independent analysis? Let's see, 2, Councilmember Ryder, do you? Okay, so if you could give us that analysis. Next question from Councilmember Block was whether, if I understood, the sales tax credit goes away if Burien, for Seattle, if Burien removes the potential annexation.
Whether it continues to be available if we send it out.
So do we have support for staff to further analyze that issue?
Isn't that part of the other? They're separate. Councilmember Block asked them separate questions.
So we have section 2 support for
Yeah, I
that.
think if Rushman turned around, third party to do that.
Okay, so we have support for those 2. Third question from Councilmember Block. I didn't get that quite in the notes. What was that question?
What the process is for having a requirement that the transition, subject first of all.
Okay, so the process for adding that as a policy for the city of Burien, do we have support for staff to give us that information? So that's a yes? Okay, so next item was Councilmember Robinson's request for BMO tax information.
I support that.
Okay. What else? So that's 3 there, so yes on that one. Next item, Deputy Mayor Clark's request that we write a letter to the library system.
And could I get clarification? I caught the part of it that said the letter would urge that they go forward with construction of improvements in Boulevard Park. Was there a second half to that?
I think it's important that they talked a little about bringing community folks together to discuss potentially where to locate it.
So in other words, encouraging them to hold a community forum of some, for siting. So those two items, that's what the letter did.
I'm a little unclear, so we're talking about moving ahead immediately on the construction of Boulevard Park Library, and also there are questions about whether or not something decided where it is now or if it's constructed.
Well, Boulevard Park Library was never reconstruction, that's for some remodeling and.
Yeah, that's the impression I got.
Yeah, and it would be at the same location. The relocation part, the community committee to discuss the siting would be for the White Center Library.
Okay, yeah, that's the clarification on it.
But at the meeting the other night, they mentioned Boulevard Park in passing, but they didn't say there was a schedule or anything for the improvements. I think it's important for the people in Burien to know when those improvements are going to be made, so that's one of the reasons for the letter.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, then the proposal would be for us to write a letter to the staff and board saying that we request immediate action on moving forward with Boulevard Park, and community, that they kind of discuss with the community where to site the White Center Library if they are going to consider moving. Is that correct? Okay, so.
I have a question.
Councilman Gregor.
I thought I heard earlier thinking that the King County Library System already has the community involvement part of the strategy. I misunderstood that.
No, it was encouraged by one of their new members that they do that, but they didn't move ahead with that.
So, okay, so do we have support to have staff draft a letter to come back to us by the next meeting?
We could bring it back, or I could send out drafts to council as we have in the past for your signature if maybe it isn't possible.
Yeah, I would prefer to have it come back to us so we can discuss it. This is pretty substantial issues. So yeah, I support moving forward with the letter and then having us discuss it at our next meeting.
I guess there's no time for this.
They directed their facilities person to move ahead with looking around the current location and a little to the north for property. So I don't know how long that process took.
I could draft a letter for your review, and I could call Bill Potasic and say such a letter's on the road, generally say this.
Okay. So I support that request. Anyone else? Support that? Okay. Support to bring that back to us. Last request was Deputy Mayor Clark's request to form a budget committee. And so this is a request to actually form the committee?
Yeah, we struggle with.
I would say let's not discuss it now. I don't think we should make this decision now. I would say this would be kind of a future agenda topic to consider this.
Well, that's fine, just so it doesn't get lost.
Okay, so do we have support to, well, and I guess so first, before we decide that, so we don't have any agenda topics for December 17th at this point.
That's correct.
So do we have consensus to then not have the meeting given that on December 17th?
I always think that.
Okay, so one, vote for yes to have the meeting.
I have other things to do. We don't have anything substantial to discuss.
Okay, so one no. Do we have any further thoughts on whether to have the meeting?
I would prefer to have a meeting, but
might want to look at talking about in generic terms is the whole concept of the community center and what, do we have a need for that still? How does the city council want to help look at how the city in the future might put together a 2 to 3 year plan? Get some sense of what we're going to do with that for the community, betterment of the community. So that might be something that may not take a lot of staff time to prepare for, but it might be something worth spending your time trying to sort that out. Or at least come to a resolution where we want to proceed or not in the future.
Okay, so now we have another proposal for 17th. Do we want to discuss a community center at that meeting?
I agree that it's a worthy topic, but I would personally prefer it to be a study session topic. I think that would be more appropriate.
Okay, so
And I'll agree with Councilmember Block. It also seems to me that there would be significant staff time involved in that, and there isn't a time frame between now and the 17th.
We'd be glad to put together what we can. I was thinking that you have a meeting on the 12th, a retreat, and where we generally kind of aggregate those larger issues that you want to talk about. It is a significant issue. It's something we do need to talk about. There's a significant study behind this, a lot of work. And I know it's a high priority for the council and also for staff.
okay, so I don't hear then the consensus to have that. So given that, then back to the question of whether we have a meeting on the 17th. I've just got one firm yes on the 17th. Anyone else have quick thoughts? Otherwise, okay, it looks like we don't have support to have a meeting on the 17th, given that we do not have any agenda topics. And so given that, do we need to, so we have still have Deputy Mayor Clark's budget committee request, which I think would be a future agenda topic.
I think that would be more appropriate as a retreat topic.
Okay.
And I'm fine with that.
Okay, so sounds like we have support to discuss that at the retreat. And that takes us through the list of questions I had from everyone. Seeing no further comments, we'll move on to council reports. Any council reports this evening? Councilmember Block.
Yes, there are two things. First of all, I want to report an interaction I had with CARES on Saturday. And I was driving along Amon Boulevard and saw a stray dog. So after this dog crossed down on my, went and chased it down and caught it and took it to CARES, and they checked it for a chip and attempted to contact the vet where the chip was registered at, and unfortunately the vet was closed. But later the owner of the dog contacted CARES and they put them in touch with me. I decided rather than put the dog in a dog jail, I would take it home with me. And so I knew the dog and owner were reunited. So I think in the sake of fairness, I think it's important to note a positive outcome regarding CARES and my experience with them. The other thing I'd like to bring up is my union local every year has a program called Christmas for Kids, and we help over 200 kids. And I bring this up not to highlight our actions, but tomorrow morning the Burien Fred Meyer is going to open their doors an hour early at 6 a.m. so that our members can go in there and go through the lists that have been given to them by these kids and their parents and go shopping, and they're offering a substantial discount. So I'd like to publicly acknowledge and thank the folks at Burien Fred Meyer for making this possible. Over 200 children are going to be helped. and their efforts are going to allow us to stretch our funds to help even more children. So thank you, Burien, Fred Meyer.
Okay,
One more comment. Thanks for that information, Jack. Just to let people know that there's actually a clothing drive in the lobby of the Library City Hall during the day. A teen group is doing it, so I encourage to support that also. They'll be here this week and I believe next week, so thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
I just want to make a quick comment on the whole Christmas theme. I was Santa Claus at the West Seattle Kiwanis Pancake Breakfast on Saturday, as I've been doing for about 30 years now. And I'd like to report that small children are no different now than they were 30 years ago.
Never forget.
They love stuff. Don't need it. As long as you don't scare the kids too much, it's not a problem.
Okay, seeing no further comments, can we get a motion to adjourn?
I would move adjournment.
All those in favor?
Aye.